As the fleet was delayed, waiting for convicts, waiting for Phillip, even the rations of rum and water, called grog, were not enough to prevent trouble. Some of the sailors actually went on strike for a pay advance to spend on shore. Trouble was also brewing among the Marines, who were worried that their liquor might run out.
8 men, 9 men, sir.
If it's going to take us 9 months to get down, then it's going to take them 9 months to get back, then 9 months to get out there again for rations, right? Because there's nothing there except scavengers.
The Marines were satisfied when it was agreed to load 3 years' supply of rum. People in Portsmouth just wished the fleet would go away, taking the drunken sailors and festering cargo. 16 bodies had been found in the harbour, the result of a fever epidemic on one of the convict ships. It was under control, but naval officers were running out of excuses. Then, at long last, Phillip's haggling with the government in London began to bear fruit. Things started to move again. More convicts were taken aboard and the last supplies were being loaded. After 4 months' delay, the time was coming to say farewell.
Yes, I do concern myself.
The sailors would be gone for at least 2 years. As for the convicts sentenced to 7 or 14 years or life, they had little chance to say goodbyes. Once they left Portsmouth, they would probably never see their loved ones or England again. This is the Sally Port and the old wall of Portsmouth, the arch through which many of the convicts passed on their way to the ships that were waiting on the Solent. 200 convicts taken on board during the first week in May brought the total to 759. Finally, Phillip arrived from London, and on May the 13th, 1787, without ceremony, the First Fleet was ready to leave.
Farewell to old England forever. Farewell to my rum-coated well. Farewell to the well-known Old Bailey, where I used for to cast such a swell. Singing to a lie, you a liar to me. Singing to a lie, you a liar. Singing to a lie, you a liar to me. Oh, we're bound for Botany Bay.
Phillip had problems keeping 11 ships together, but in general, everybody felt better once the fleet was at sea. In particular, the convicts perked up as the ships headed south towards the Canary Islands. Before long, the medical attention of the Navy surgeons, the vastly improved diet, and the fact that Phillip released them from their chains all led to trouble. A convict mutiny was quelled on board the Scarborough. There were good and bad ships, but those naval and marine officers who kept journals recorded several floggings and quarrels before the volcanic peak of Tenerife hove into sight, the first port of call after 3 weeks at sea. Tenerife was and is a Spanish port, and relations between the Spanish and the British were strained following the American War. Nevertheless, the fleet got a warm reception, and arrangements were made for Phillip to buy what supplies the island could offer. This is a hard place to grow much at the best of times, and Phillip had 1,350 mouths to feed. Long-term supplies had to be conserved. Greens and fruit were needed regularly to prevent scurvy. The fleet found only onions available. At least they could fill up with water. It took only a week before they set off once more, this time for a much longer voyage down across the Atlantic. New problems soon arose. This time it was the sailors who went on strike, refusing to work aloft until their rations were improved. It turned out they wanted more, not for themselves, but to buy favours from the convict women. Below decks, there was a shady traffic going on through holes made in the bulkheads, and several children would later be born as a result. Naval officers sorted out the dispute, and a marine involved was punished on board the flagship with 300 lashes. The women convicts continued troublesome and abusive, but the fleet pressed on. For a while, Phillip was worried about their slow progress, and reduced the water ration to 3 pints a day, dangerously little in the tropics. They picked up speed, however, and on the 3rd of August, the fleet dropped anchor outside the harbour of Rio de Janeiro. After 9 weeks at sea, the members of the fleet were both relieved and excited to see Rio's Sugarloaf Mountain. Unfortunately, however, the winds then set in against them, and for 4 days they had to stand off at sea, waiting for the winds to change so that they could enter the harbour mouth. Lieutenant Raper painted the view. Modern Rio looks rather different, although tucked away at the foot of the towers is the old palace. Captain Phillip was made welcome here by the Portuguese Viceroy, governor of what was then the colony of Brazil. Phillip's service in the Portuguese Navy was remembered, and the fleet was treated to an island in the harbour called Enchadas as their headquarters. The convicts were kept on board, but once Enchadas was set up, the officers could go ashore to explore the city, then a thriving slave market. The very first landmark the officers of the First Fleet saw when they came ashore was this monument, the drinking fountain of Master Valentino, now in the heart of Rio, and in those days supplied with fresh water from the hills along an aqueduct. The ships were filled up with water from this source. The next urgent necessity for the fleet personnel was fruit to counteract scurvy, and in this Rio was bountiful. The convicts were given a bonus of 10 oranges each. While the supply work went on, some of the officers admired the city churches and stood amazed, from their Protestant point of view, at the religious zeal and huge crowds at local Catholic festivals. Amorous adventures were not easy to come by. At least the officers had little success. The seamen and marines, however, when their turn to go on shore came, did rather better. But then they were not so choosy or so bound by decorum. They went to have a riotously good time. The Marines, the keepers of the convicts, got into a lot of trouble. Drinking too much, womanising, stealing, fighting, passing off counterfeit coins made by the convicts, and deserting. And when they were caught, they were normally clapped into the local Portuguese prison. The Portuguese then simply handed them back to the fleet authorities, who court-martialed them and gave out sentences of 200 or 300 lashes. The fleet left again with a relatively clean sheet, heading east across the South Atlantic in windy weather. The pattern of life at sea soon reasserted itself, with births, deaths, trouble and punishment. Convict Mary Broad bore a daughter in the height of the storm. A couple of convicts fell overboard and were left behind. There was another mutiny attempt, this time on board the Alexander, and the Marines, as usual, were drunk and insubordinate. But in general, the 6-week voyage to the last port of call was reckoned uneventful. On the 13th of October, in clear weather, with a fresh breeze, the fleet furled its sails and came to anchor off Cape Town. After the green hills of Rio, Table Mountain looked dark and forbidding. But Lieutenant Raper painted the scene as the fleet came in. Phillip didn't really want to stop at Cape Town because the port was in the hands of the Dutch, and in particular the Dutch East India Company. Once the fleet dropped anchor in Table Bay, Phillip sent King, the aide-de-camp, ashore to negotiate with the foreigners